Hello, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex Podcast, the NFL edition. I am your host, Bryan Mears. I am joined by fellow Fantasy Labs guys, Peter Jennings, a.k.a. CSU Ram 88, Matthew Freedman, and Ian Hartitz. We thought that our last podcast of the year was going to be a couple weeks ago, but by popular demand, we are hopping back on to discuss the Super Bowl. So we're going to hit on projected game flow. We'll talk some of the DFS Slate available on the sites, and then we'll talk about some of the interesting Super Bowl props that we found. So we'll get into all of that. This podcast is brought to you by the Action Network, which Fantasy Labs is a part of. Quick promo, the Action Network Super Bowl package is now out in full glory with breakdowns on which way the line will move, the must-bet props, predictions for the game, and much, much more. Get full access to all of the pro content through the end of the Super Bowl for just $5.20 at actionnetwork.com/Super Bowl. Again, that is $5.20, which matches up with Super Bowl 52 at actionnetwork.com/Super Bowl. All right, fellas, let's get into the game. Let's talk about projected game flow, just what advantages for each team we expect. I think the best way to do this is to start on either side of the ball. So let's start off with the Patriots going against the Eagles. The Patriots offense going against the Eagles defense, rather. Let's talk about that matchup. It's an interesting one. You know, Pats have one of the best offenses. Eagles have one of the best defenses. It seems like it's going to be that matchup is particularly going to be the one that people are looking at. Freeman, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on that particular side of the ball, advantages for either side?
So it's interesting. When you look at the Patriots offense going against the Eagles defense, it's kind of similar a little bit to the matchup that they had 2 weeks ago against the Jags in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Like the Jags, the Eagles are very good at getting pressure with their front four. And they are strongest on the outside with their cornerbacks. But I think that sort of flows to Tom Brady's strengths, where he's very good at passing to running backs, at tight ends, and then also those slot receivers in the middle of the field. And that is where the Eagles are the weakest. So I think we will continue to see kind of more of the same of what we normally just see from the Patriots, which is just those fast passes to minimize the pass rushing capability of the Eagles, and then also to maximize the strengths of the Patriots against the weaknesses of the Eagles. And I think you can maybe count on that with a little more certainty because Belichick and then just the offensive staff there in general, they're very good at exploiting the weaknesses of defenses. We don't normally see, or we don't always see that in game plans, but we tend to see that a little bit more with the Patriots. So they just relentlessly attack teams where they are weakest, and I think we're going to see that with the Patriots.
Yeah, Ian, what are your thoughts on that? How you think the Patriots are going to attack and then where they are the weakest? It seems like there's some data that on the middle of the field with like some short passes. So we know Brady likes to utilize those guys like Amendola, even James White out of the backfield, Chris Hogan, and then Gronk obviously is a problem for any team, and the Eagles have been at least a little susceptible to tight ends. So what would you expect as far as the game plan for Belichick and company going against this Eagles defense?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with a lot of things Matt said. I mean, this Eagles D-line is just so beastly. Chris Long and Derek Barnett don't even start, but they come in on pass-first situations, and those guys can get after the quarterback as well as anyone. So they're really loaded all across that defensive line. The thing about – I understand their DVOA rank down the middle of the field is tough, but I am wondering if Malcolm Jenkins, probably their best secondary player, is going to be locked up on Gronk, and Patrick Robinson, their best corner, might find Amendola. We've seen slot receivers have success against Philly this year, but the one guy that really intrigues me is Chris Hogan. He's had a reduced role since he's come back from his shoulder injury, but the way it's looking is he'll have a lot of Jalen Mills, who gave up a league-high 9 touchdowns this season. So, Hogan still has had that big red zone role, and I do agree that, we'll see plenty of dicking and dunking. Deion Lewis is getting so many catches every week now. It's ridiculous. But I do think the Eagles at least have the personnel to theoretically be a better defense against, Amendola and Gronk. So I'm really curious if these receivers can actually win these outside battles because unlike the Jags, I do think the Eagles' outside corners are probably their biggest weakness.
Interesting. Pete, round us out here.
Yeah, I think there's some good points across the board there. One other matchup that I do want to – well, there's two matchups on the Eagles side going against the Patriots I want to point out. Shout out to Warren Sharp, who talked extensively about the edge that the Eagles are going to have rushing the football, which could be really interesting for the game. I mean, if the Eagles get behind early in the game, obviously it's going to change. But if they can keep this game close or even get a lead, they're definitely going to be relying heavily on the run. That's the game plan they want. And then obviously, hopefully getting a pass rush on Tom Brady, which has really been the only recipe, getting a pass rush with four guys, which I think the Eagles can do. That's been the recipe to beat the Patriots. So that's one angle. That's if you're bullish on the Eagles, that's what you're hoping comes to fruition. And the other game flow scenarios, which I think is interesting for props and DFS, the thing that I like the most for the Eagles in the passing matchup is Nelson Aguilar in the slot. He's going to, the Eagles. I've looked to him more, giving him opportunities and reverses, and obviously he's really matured as a player in the slot. The Patriots in the last 2 months have just gotten crushed. Even Evan Silva just tweeted out, Patriots got drilled by the slot wide receivers last 2 months. Nelson Aguilar, 90% slot, versus Eric Rowe will be Eagles' most favorable passing game matchup in Super Bowl 52. So that's something that I'm looking at as well to take advantage of. I did see some props initially where you had to lay heavy juice, but the over was only 3 catches for Nelson Aguilar. Now I'm seeing 3.5 most places with heavy juice on him as well. So we'll dive more into that, but those are some other interesting angles. I agree that with Ian, that Hogan's a really interesting kind of contrarian fantasy play this week. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at Deion Lewis and Gronk if Gronk does end up playing.
Yeah, interesting points. Freeman, so let's continue on the Eagles offense versus the Patriots defense like Peter was talking about there. What are your thoughts on that particular matchup, advantages for either side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think Pete nailed it there. The running game is going to be key for the Eagles. Ajayi has increasingly become a touch monster. The unfortunate thing with him is that he's still not getting the work near the goal line. That is going pretty squarely to LeGarrette Blount. And then you have Corey Clement, who is coming in and still in some passing work. But Ajayi is getting some more action in the passing game, so that's good. It gives him a little more of a solid floor. But the big thing is that he is used primarily as the guy, the workhorse to get the yards when they're running on first and second down. And the Patriots, even though they have gotten stronger on defense, specifically since week 7, even though they've gotten stronger, they're still 30th in rush DVOA. So it's not a good situation for them to be going against a team that is pretty good running the ball, even without their left tackle who's out for the year. So I think that is really going to be the key. If the Eagles can run the ball well, I think they would be incentivized to do that. I mean, pretty much the way that Jacksonville would have been 2 weeks ago. If they can run the ball, they can keep the ball out of Tom Brady's hands more. They can minimize any potential mistakes from Nick Foles and try to shorten the game, and I think that would benefit them.
Ian, round us out here. What are your thoughts on Eagles O versus Pat State?
Yeah, I think these guys said it. I mean, Pats have the second worst defensive line in the league and adjusted line yards per rush. So, their secondary got a lot better as the year went on, but we really didn't see the same increase in effectiveness on a run defense. I think obviously, like Freedman said, it benefits Ajayi probably the most, but Blunt's got that goal line role. Just as a kind of another contrarian option. I mean, I feel like Corey Clement's in a similar spot as like James White last year. This guy really hasn't had that many touches lately, but he is kind of, Ajayi's gotten more receptions, but Clement's still involved in the passing game. And if there was a situation where the Eagles got down by a lot, he could maybe have a larger role, and he also returns kicks. So got some touches there. But then, I think the big guy to worry about in the passing game is Nelson Aguilar, like Pete said. I mean, Eric Rowe was PFF's 15th worst cornerback out of 121 eligible DBs. And since Foles took over, Ertz has led the team in targets, but Nelson Aguilar actually has more than Alshon Jeffrey. So, Alshon is maybe the best pure receiver of the group. We saw him come down with some nice contested catches last week. But as far as targets go, and then once you add in the reverse or two Nelson's been getting the last 2 weeks, I think he's probably the guy on that team with the highest, other than Ertz, highest target floor and the potential to make a really big play.
One quick thing I want to add into this about the Eagles offense. We haven't really mentioned Foles yet. He's been good in his last 2 games, and it's possible that the market could be overvaluing that. There are a lot of people who are going on the Eagles in this game, but one thing that really is interesting is that if you look at the degree to which the Eagles have outperformed the spread, for the entire season they've outperformed the spread. Let me rephrase that. The degree to which they have outperformed their implied game total on offense. So for the season, they've outperformed it by 4.35 points. With Foles in particular, especially if you take out Week 17, which he played only a few series, you probably shouldn't count that. It's been 4.31. So basically, the Eagles on offense with Foles against the spread or against their implied point total, they've been basically just as productive with Foles as they were with Carson Wentz. That doesn't mean at all that Foles is as good as Wentz, because there was some adjusting down in expectations. But the point is that they have exceeded expectations with Foles basically just as much as they were exceeding them when they had Carson Wentz. So if it is possible for the Patriots to be strong against the defense by putting more people in the box, and that's what they've done recently, and basically forcing Foles to have to beat them, it really is conceivable that Foles could do better than most people think.
That's interesting. Yeah, this the Foles-Wentz dynamic, particularly as it pertains to the spread, is really, really interesting in this game. I mean, Pete, how surprised are you that the public is on the underdog here with Nick Foles, and what would this line be if Carson Wentz was playing?
Well, we talked extensively about this on the Three Donkeys podcast yesterday. Levitan is a huge Wentz guy. I'm a huge Wentz guy as well. Bales is really talking about how Nick Foles is dramatically underrated. I think that the game would probably be Pats -2.5, maybe -3. That 3 is just such a big number if Wentz is playing. So it's interesting to kind of see how the lines moved. Levitan thinks the public's chasing their tail. Obviously, the public was behind the Falcons and then the Vikings. They got burned by the Eagles 2 weeks in a row. The public might have recency bias with the Eagles just trouncing the Vikings and the Patriots barely winning. The Gronkowski news is also kind of an interesting dynamic to the spread as well. But yeah, to your original question, I mean, I definitely think Wentz is a much better quarterback than Foles, but I think Foles is still a good quarterback. I think Foles is easily one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league, probably one of the top 20 or 25 quarterbacks still in this league, and I think he can play well here. Bales likes to quote the really efficient season he had with Chip Kelly. I think Chip Kelly deserves a lot of credit there too, but I think he can get it done. And this game, I'm really struggling because when the public is on a dog, it almost automatically means you should be betting the favorite. But I think the line's pretty efficient. So I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts there?
Just one more thought on this. Kind of opposite. It doesn't have to do with the Wentz-Foles dynamic, but it has to do with the Patriots. So the beginning of the season on defense, they were just getting shredded. The first 6 quarterbacks they faced, all of them went for over 300 yards. Malcolm Butler at one point was benched. Stephon Gilmore was benched. It was sort of chaos, especially in the secondary. And since week 7, they haven't allowed one 300-yard passer. That defense has really toughened up. And as a result, they have this sort of, I mean, it's classic, a bend but don't break. That's their de facto defensive mode. But since week 7, they have allowed opponents to score only 14.5 points per game. So it is a legit thing. When you can shut down an opponent's passing game, you really limit their offensive upside. So that is I'm fairly, I don't know. I'm torn. I guess I'm like Pete. I'm torn. I'm really interested on the Eagles side of this, but the Patriots defensively have been very good for the last 3 months. And I don't think that the market is appreciating just how good they have been.
Fair points. Fair points. Yeah. All right. Before we get to the DFS slate and props, I'll just open up if anyone has any thoughts on other aspects of the game. Obviously, it is an interesting coaching matchup, as always, when you have Belichick on one side. Experience definitely favors the Patriots in the spot. There's definitely a turnover advantage, I think, for the Eagles defense especially. And then, special teams, Freedman, like Gostkowski, he might be the biggest advantage that the Patriots have. Am I right?
Maybe Allen's not a bad kicker though. So he's a rookie, I believe. So it's a big moment for him. And like, if ever there were a moment you were going to like just predict a kicker to miss, it would be like a rookie kicker in the Super Bowl. Like, how easy could that be? But one thing you mentioned, the coaching edge. There's a pro piece on the Action Network, so I don't want to give too much away, but it does talk about when Belichick has had multiple weeks to prepare for a game, and then specifically when he's going against another coach who has had multiple weeks to prepare for that game, what the against the spread record looks like and spread differentials look like in that scenario. So some people might find that kind of intriguing. Definitely it's up to you as to whether you believe that data is actually actionable, but it's there and it's over a pretty large sample size of games.
Any last thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about kind of just the Eagles scheme. I mean, I think last week, Collinsworth mentioned their RPOs about 20 times, but this really is kind of NFC equivalent to the Chiefs, which is the one offense we've kind of seen give the Eagles the most trouble over the years. I mean, Peterson, obviously Andy Reid's OC not too long ago, and I do think it is this type of offense that has a lot of window dressing kind of going on in the backfield and has proven to give the Patriots some trouble. I mean, I don't think, I wouldn't compare Torrey Smith to Tyreek Hill or their running backs to what the Chiefs had going on. Obviously, Nick Foles isn't the same running threat, but I think it is interesting that the Eagles do basically run the offense that I think if we collectively pick the Patriots' biggest issue before the playoffs, I think a lot of people were saying the Chiefs were going to cause a lot of problems. So, we already talked about how the Eagles have the ability to get after Brady with their four-man rush, which is in the past kind of been the way to handle that. So I think also on the offensive side of the ball, they have this edge both in the running game against that, like we said, rush defense that hasn't exactly killed it, and potentially opportunity to hit some of these play action big plays.
Cool. All right. Let's touch on the DFS slate. So these sites have just one game slates, should like the DraftKings Showdown. It's a unique format. If you haven't played this type of format, you're just used to the regular NFL formats throughout the regular season. You have to take 4 offensive players and 2 defensive players. You do have a salary cap of the usual $50K. So definitely interesting dynamics as far as roster construction go. Ian, you wrote breakdowns for both DraftKings and FanDuel this week. So definitely going to lean on your expertise in this segment. So what are your thoughts on the slates, particularly players that stand out for their price tag? Maybe any thoughts on roster construction? And I think the biggest edge that people are going to want to hear is your thoughts on the defensive rosters or the defensive slots that you have to take. You have to take 2 of the 6 defensive players. So what are your thoughts on the DFS slate for this weekend? Yeah,
I'll start off with some of the defense. One thing I really wanted to look at, because I think there's kind of 2 mindsets you can have with the defense. Do you want to pick the ballers, the guys that are the best players, but maybe the offense tries to avoid them? Or do you want the guys that get targeted the most and have the best chance to rack up tackles? So I don't have a perfect answer for that, but I think the one thing we can control is trying to get the guys who will be on the field the most. So I basically pulled up everyone who has been on the field for at least 50% of the snaps in these 2 playoff weeks. Found out that both teams are basically their safeties and cornerbacks. Those starters are on the field almost 95% plus the snaps. So if you really, I think maximizing your chance for plays is honestly getting some of these safeties. Mike Lombardi was talking on GM Street about Malcolm Jenkins, and now he really is this 3-level type of player. They blitz him, they play him in the box, he can play center field. And honestly, Patrick Chung's not as good, but Devin McCourty, they're kind of interchangeable as well. So I think we have a unique situation in this game with a lot of versatility at safety. And then, if we are thinking that the Patriots are going to keep doing their thing, try to attack the middle of the field, that's a lot more situations for the safeties to, again, get after it. Neither team blitzes a ton, so I don't think we're going to get the usual sacks and tackle for a loss opportunities out of some of the linebackers. So I think your best bet on defense is either going with some of the safeties and corners and hoping for big plays there, or going with some of these pass rushers. From that end, we've seen Trey Flowers from the Patriots and Brandon Graham overwhelmingly play the most snaps. But again, we got to think about the types of snaps. So I don't hate a contrarian view where maybe you go with like Chris Long and Derek Barnett and hope for some sacks, but at the same time, you're not going to see those guys on the field for over 50% of the snaps. So I think basically maximizing the amount of time you can get the guys on the field and the guys that have the best chance to be around the football is the best way to go.
Yeah, great points there. Pete, I mean, so like on DraftKings, we have the $2.4 million big game millionaire, which is $20 to enter $1 million first. This is like a new format with the offense and defensive players. There's 141,000 contestants in there. It seems like you could have a pretty good edge in this by really grinding like some of that information that Ian just said. What are your thoughts on like the contest format, and like do you think there's a pretty nice edge if you really put in the research?
Yeah, I actually do think there's a pretty nice edge here, and I think one other thing that you can do that's just very basic that will give you an edge is not spend the salary here. There's less roster spots, only 6 guys, and the payout structure, $1 million of the $2.4 million is going to first. It goes from $1 million to first down to second place for $100,000. So having a unique lineup here is absolutely critical to give yourself that equity of winning $1 million. So that's where the edge would come in. Obviously, there's a ton of variance there, but one way you can really kind of ensure you have a unique lineup is not spending all the salary. The next element is definitely maximizing correlation. The one thing, too, that you can look at here is, if one team's on the field a lot, scoring a lot of points, that's probably going to be good for these defensive guys as well. Tackles are worth a lot here. Obviously, any big touchdown play would be big as well. So I'm with Ian completely that you want to get the guys that are going to be playing a lot of snaps regardless, and then kind of figuring out what kind of game flow you think is going to happen and making sure you construct your roster in that way is really important as well. So there's different strategies for cash games and tournaments every single time you play DFS, but this week I think it's amplified even a little bit more, kind of given the new roster construction that you have to look at. And I really think the big thing here is leaving some money on the table or doing things that are really unique to make sure your lineup is different than others, because I guarantee there'll be a ton of duplicates in this later.
Yeah. Great points for sure. Freeman, I'll round it out with you, and then Ian, definitely want your thoughts before we move on to props on just interesting players at their price points. But Freeman, go ahead and give your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so before I talk about players, I just want to kind of second Pete's point that we're in a really interesting scenario here where, like, you normally beforehand would maybe think about kind of correlating maybe different offensive players with their defense. So maybe if you had a running back, you'd also want to stack with his defense or something like that. And now we're in this scenario of correlating offensive players with defensive players on their team. So like that is really interesting. Or defensive players on the other team, or just, like, there are different ways that you can spin this. So I think it is really interesting, and I think to Pete's point, really focusing on those offensive and defensive correlations, and then going under the salary is really going to be where this is won. But yeah, totally agree with Ian that in general, safeties I think will provide the most value on the defensive side. And then on the offensive side, I think people are going to be maybe over-correlating a little bit, or just like amplified seeking correlation, like Brady and then tons of his pass catchers. And I think it's possible that some of the running backs who are cheaper will provide good value. So Dion Lewis, I think, is fairly cheap. But, he could have, like 20 fantasy points. Like, I mean, he could have a big game. You also have Jay Ajayi, who, I think is locked in for a minimum of 15 touches and could get, like to 20, 22 touches. And he's fairly cheap going against a defense that, hasn't been all that great against the run. So those are two of the guys who are interesting. And then Pete mentioned Nelson Aguilar. He's also interesting and on the cheaper side. But yeah, really, I'm looking at the guys who are cheaper and kind of starting from there.
Ian, any last thoughts?
Yeah, so sticking on we'll go Eagles offense first. But yeah, I think the disparity between Alshon at $10K and Aguilar at $7,400 is just way too based on last week's results and not so much like the last 5 weeks of what we've seen. So, I'm not sure how the ownership might look with that, but I definitely think Nelson provides more value than Alshon might at that price point. I think Freedman mentioned earlier, it's a good point. Ajayi's been getting these carries, but at the same time, he's not getting the goal line carries. So, I mean, who knows? It's one game. If we could see a LeGarrette Blount getting 5 carries inside the 5-yard line, it wouldn't be terribly shocking. And him at
revenge game.
Exactly. And so LeGarrette, 5,500, Ajayi 8,300. Again, that's a pretty big disparity there. I mentioned earlier that I like Corey Clement as a real contrarian punt play, just as a chance to maybe load up on high-priced guys elsewhere. For the Patriots, I do think it's worth noting, I mean, Deion Lewis has been that guy. It'd be shocking if they don't find a way to get him 20 touches, which is how good he's been. But at the same time, I mean, James White did outsnap him last week. When the Patriots are in that 2-minute mode, in that come-from-behind mode, James White's on the field more often. And we only saw 3 snaps out of Rex Burkhead. So haven't seen anything that says, we should expect Burkhead's involvement to go up, but you'd think with an extra 2 weeks off, maybe he can get a little bit healthier. And I think Burkhead, we saw how good he can be receiving earlier this year and also around the goal line. So maybe as a, slightly contrarian play, he's a little bit cheaper than the other guys. Don't mind taking a shot with him either.
Great.
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hogan is so much cheaper than Amendola. It's very ridiculous. So that's one. And I get that Amendola, he's in the position where he's basically playing the Julian Edelman role. He could get a lot of targets. Like even last Super Bowl, he got a lot of targets. He was important. And he's been an important guy this season. But Hogan, I mean, we saw last year in the playoff game, he exploded for, was it 180 yards and 2 touchdowns or something? I mean, he has significant upside as well. So given the pricing disparity, I think he's someone to pay attention to in GPPs.
Good stuff there. All right, well, let's spend the rest of our time here just talking about props. There are millions of them that you can find, I'm sure, all over the place on different sports books. So we won't obviously be able to hit all of them, but we'll hit some ones that are standing out to us. We'll sort of go around and talk and converse back and forth on the ones that are interesting. Pete, I'll start with you. One thing that I know that you guys talked about on the 3 Donkeys and that Bales has written about, it's been in a lot of our content, is some of these sort of situational props like overtime. And I know that you have some takes on those. So I'll kick to you first and thoughts on those situational props and just other props that are standing out to you.
Yeah, I like the no overtime prop quite a bit. Bales mentioned that as well. I don't want to go too much into it. I definitely want people to check out his piece on the props. But that was something I fired last year that obviously didn't work out. I fired that in addition to no extra point missed, no 2-point conversion, all these correlated kind of props that unfortunately did hit last year where you're obviously you're risking a lot to win a little. And in general, that's one thing I think that's really important to be cognizant of when you're looking at these props is kind of understanding what the general person's going to do. Most guys want to bet these props where they're, getting a big return on their investment if they're lucky enough to hit. And a lot of times they'll be inefficient where if you're willing to lay a lot of money to win a little, you can find some profitable props. So the overtime one looks really good to me. That falls into that category. The player props in general are a little bit more efficient, but historically you've wanted to take a lot of these unders. Most people are firing the overs on the prop. And in general, the prop makers are basing these on the mean versus the median performances of these players. So I'm looking for unders a lot. We'll see if I end up firing any of them. There could be some decent unders here if you're bullish on the Eagles taking under on some of these Pats players. I like Nelson Aguilar, who I mentioned earlier. His props have come up to 3.5 catches, which is tougher to swallow versus the 3. But yeah, I think we'll dive into some more here. I'm no expert on the entertainment stuff. I'm definitely going to be relying heavily on Bales, who also went into some of the Gatorade stuff and the national anthem of the 3 Donkeys yesterday.
Yeah, definitely go check out Bale's piece. The props that he is betting, that's live on both Labs and the Action Network site. So definitely go check that out for his analysis there. Freeman, I'll get to you. What are some that are standing out to you they can be sort of whatever, situational, player-specific entertainment, whatever. What do you like?
Well, one thing I would say is that it would be good for people to shop around online. Is for the props. I mean, it's like at this point 4.5 everywhere for the spread. That's consensus, but there is pretty decent discrepancy at different places based on the props. So if you are a props junkie, as I am this week, at some point you'll notice that like there are some sites that are offering like 2 minutes for the national anthem, and then 2 minutes and a second and a half for the national anthem, which that might not seem like it means much, but it's something, right? So if you shop around, you can find some better lines at places compared to others. But that said, some of the props that are catching my eye, one, will Nipplegate be said during the broadcast? Yes is plus 500. No is negative 900. I'm pounding the no on that pretty hard. My head will explode if I don't even know who's broadcasting this game. But if someone says Nipplegate, I think the only way it would happen is if like someone from the crowd shouts Nipplegate and it's picked up on a mic or something like that. There's one that's a punt return touchdown. Yes is plus 600. No is negative 1,000. I'm going to be doing some research on that. And one thing I should say is that we're going to have a piece on Action Network that looks at the 52 props that the staff writers like the most. So definitely be sure to check out that piece. Some of these might end up being on that. One is first challenge, which team is going to challenge first, and it's just negative 115 in both directions. I think that is highly exploitable in that I think what is less important is whether there is a challengeable play, and what's more important is how the coaches view the importance of any given play within the game, and just what their history is of calling challenges in the first place. Like I think someone like Belichick would rather not make a challenge and risk losing a timeout and save the timeouts for the last 2 minutes. But Belichick has only challenged 6 times in the last 2 years. Doug Peterson has challenged 19 times in the last 2 years. Like he just any play that is borderline, he's throwing the challenge flag. So it's not as if it's like 50-50 between those two guys. There is a clear edge with Peterson viewing plays as things that should be challenged and Belichick not. Another one is first timeout. It's negative 115 in both directions. I view the Eagles as being the team that is much likelier to be in a situation they're not sure what's going on and they just burn a timeout in the first quarter. I don't see the Patriots being as likely to do that. So there are different situations, things like that I'm focusing on at this point a little bit more than the player props. But total quarterback sacks, I've seen different lines around there. 4.5 is one that I'm seeing around there. I'm interested in the over on that just because the Eagles are so good at getting pressure with 4. And then in their last 8 or 9 games, the Patriots actually have been better at creating pressure. Kind of through like manufacturing pressure and getting sacks that you maybe wouldn't expect them to get. So I'm interested in the over there as well, but shop around. One has to do with lead changes. Is there going to be a lead change in the second half? Let me see what the line for that is. Yes, plus 135, no, negative 165. Like I would bet my right arm that there's going to be an arm change. I mean, not an arm change, a lead change at some point in the second half. Like it just seems like it's going to be that type of game unless it's just a total blowout from the Patriots. But I would imagine that there's a lead change. So anyway, I think there are a lot of props that people should be taking a look at, just hundreds of them, and it's fascinating. You will waste your life looking at these props.
Yeah, there's so many. Ian, what's standing out to you?
Yeah, one thing Pete mentioned, I think we all kind of want to pound these overs sometimes, but some of the value might be with the unders. We have our prop dashboard that compares our projections and calculates the bet quality. And right now, 5 of our top 7 bets are the unders on various players. So make sure you check that out. And also, Chris Collinsworth will be announcing this game. And one of the props Bales hit on, which I thought was smart, was will a broadcaster mentioned Pro Football Focus. The S is at minus 200. Seems like Collinsworth, given how much he owns in that company and the fact they've been doing the PFF grades and the pregame intros all year, seems like they might say that. And then another kind of quirky one I liked was temperature at kickoff versus total points scored in the first quarter. Current forecast is at 6 degrees, so I haven't been able to find a first quarter total line, but I don't know if you think someone could score a first quarter touchdown, might be able to get that one. Some of the over ones I do like. Mentioned earlier, some of this kind of still are some question marks in the Patriots backfield, so I think Burkhead and James White might have a little bit lower and, have a chance to get those receiving totals up if the game maybe doesn't go quite the way we think it'll go. Mentioned Nelson Aguilar. I like his yards in addition to their receptions. I mean, the Patriots, they haven't really gotten completely roasted yardage-wise to slot guys, but, I mean, each of Jarvis Landry, Eric Decker, Alan Hearns, Mohamed Sanu, and Juju Smith-Schuster all had at least 6 catches against them. So, I mean, teams are not being quiet at all about going after Eric Rowe and company. And then last one, little fun one, was Trump tweets in-game under 2.5. Did an advanced Twitter search yesterday, and he only tweeted during the pregame and allegedly left his Super Bowl party in the third quarter. So I don't know, man. Maybe he'll try to take over the moment and do some of that, but based on our 1 year history of it, it seems like that line's a little high.
Very interesting. So the ones that are always –
I can't speculate on Trump. I'm gonna have to. I was just intrigued, and I just realized I can't. If I bet on Trump, it's only going to go badly.
You have to recuse yourself, yeah.
I have to step out of anything.
Pete, when you decide to bet on Trump, let me know what you're betting so I can take the other side.
Yeah, that's the sharp side. Opposite whatever I do.
Oh, gosh. Some props that I always find interesting are these cross-sport props. So, like, for example, there's an interesting one, James Harden points versus the Cavs on Saturday night in that primetime matchup, or the distance of the first made field goal, and you're getting it's -5.5 in the field goal. So that one's interesting to me. James Harden in the primetime matchup against the worst defense. Sorry, Ian, I know you're rocking your Cavs sweatshirt here, but yeah, such a bad defense, James Harden in primetime. Those are always interesting to me. Pete, yeah, what do you think of the cross sports props? It seems like maybe even with NBA, like it's so news-based that there could be a decent edge by following news and then hopping on these as the weekend goes along.
Yeah, make sure you're following at Fantasy Labs NBA up on all the news. That definitely can swing things. One thing that I want to point out that I've noticed in these cross-sport props and some of the props you guys have mentioned, pay really big attention to the juice. When you're paying a massive spread, oftentimes these situations that seem really inefficient, the books can make up for it with just a gargantuan spread. When you're going from +500 to -1,000 or something like that, that's a really, really tough spread to overcome. So I'm most interested in the cross-sport props that have the lowest spread. And, the Harden one is an interesting kind of thing that you can look at. I would have to know a lot more. We have a good bit of conviction in terms of where we think Harden's range of scoring is. Yeah. Obviously, field goals, we know the range, but it's wider. You want to look into kind of, where most of these field goals are being kicked against both these teams. So right. I'm interested in stuff like that where you have one really predictable thing and then something that seems somewhat predictable but hard to kind of gauge. And if you can find some data to back up why teams are kicking field goals in certain ranges, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I like the basketball ones. I love staying up on the news there. So those are probably the ones I'm most interested in. Yeah. But probably the most of my investments in this will be on unders on a lot of these players.
Yeah. Good points there. Yeah. If, like, for example, a bunch of these cross sports props we're pulling from Westgate, and they're both sides are -110. So definitely lowers very low juice on those as opposed to some of these other props. So obviously we want to plug our props dashboard. You can go on there and you can see the best props based on bet quality, which is based on the percentage difference based on our projections versus what the props are. So definitely go check that out. But of note, for example, of the 7 highest rated bet quality props, 5 of them are on the unders. So I think that definitely goes what Pete was saying, that those are probably the best bets. Any last thoughts, anyone?
One more. I'm such a degenerate on these props. I'm actually researching punt distance, because some props have to do with the distance of the first punt versus the longest touchdown in the game. Like, just so it's a rabbit hole that you can go down where you find yourself researching stuff that you never thought you would actually care about. But it's way too much fun not to do. So definitely get into it. One more prop that I'm focusing on. Let me see. Number of penalties in the game. I think it will be really easy for a lot of people just to sort of average what the Patriots have been doing and what they've been allowing, and then, do the same thing with the Eagles, and then just kind of like add that together. But throughout the playoffs, I think it's worth noting that the referee teams, which are kind of like these conglomerates of like superstars for the referees in the NFL, so not like normal teams, but just like, Pro Bowl teams of these referees, they have been very tight with the whistling, like in terms of like not doing it. So the under that you see there, the over-under, which is 12 at most places, 11.5 in some places, it has consistently been on the under in the playoffs. So something to keep in mind, like what the Eagles and the Patriots might be doing in general in terms of whether they are committing penalties or not committing penalties. What really matters is whether the refs are going to call them.
Awesome. Any last thoughts, anybody?
Yeah, I have one more funny story with Freedman talking about some of the lengths we've gone with some of these props. I wrote a kind of tongue-in-cheekish coin flip section with Mark Gallant's Awesome Entertainment prop article up on Action Network. But basically, the guy doing the coin toss is World War II veteran Herschel Woodrow Williams, and this is not his first coin toss. He actually did the 2013 Military Bowl between Maryland and Marshall, and the man flipped tails. So I don't know if you think Woody is a tails guy always. I mean, there's your edge. So
that's the data we're looking for. Ian bringing it hard. I like it. All right, we will end it there. Definitely go check out all of the content that we have at both Fantasy Labs and Action Network. Again, for just $5.20, you can get access to all the pro content, and there's a ton of it. You're definitely getting your money's worth this week. So go do that. Go check out all of that. Pete and I just recorded a PGA Flex podcast, so we got a ton of stuff this week, but it's a very exciting week. We will end it there. Thank you guys for listening or watching. As always, this is probably going to be the last podcast. I'll insert that probably word because we never know. But thank you guys for your support as always, and we'll talk to you guys soon.